Hi folks, Tim Newman with Lite Studios, and it's time for another Adobe Photoshop CC quick tip. This quick tip isn't going to be quite so quick, but I think you'll appreciate the information all the same. A while back, maybe 2 or 3 major releases, Adobe quietly released a new document dialog box, and they did it without a whole lot of fanfare, and really justifiably so, because they attempted this about 2 years back and it wasn't so well received, and then they undid it, and this is kind of their next attempt at it. This attempt is really solid, and it's unfortunate that a lot of people don't know the features that are in this dialog box, because there is a whole wealth of information and presets and stuff that just make you work faster, more consistently, and more efficiently within Photoshop, especially when it comes to creating new documents. So let's take a look at it. Up here, I can go to Photoshop's main menu and do File New. You'll also note that that's a Command-N shortcut key combination for you Mac users. That would be a Control-N shortcut key combination for you Windows users. So we'll go ahead and click on that. Takes it a second or two to populate, but before too long, the new document dialog box will be up and ready for you to take a tour. Now, the new document dialog box that you see here is really divided up into what I would consider 3 major panels. There's a panel across the top here which contains categories of presets that we'll explore here in a little bit. There's a panel here in the middle that allows you to browse through the presets in that category, as well as some pre-built projects here that you can download as well. And then over here to the right, there's this preset details panel. And this is where, when you select a preset, all the details of that preset are displayed. Or if you want to create your own new document, you can specify all of your settings right here and just manually create one on the fly, which I find to be quite handy. Both the ability to view specifically what's in a preset and the ability to create your own new document with very specific parameters on the fly. Now that we have the general layout of the new document dialog box in hand, let's dig in a little deeper and understand what some of the options are available in this dialog box as a whole. Before we get started, we're going to close down this little message right here that says, let's start something new. You'll see there's a couple of links in here that will take you to some help files so you can better understand what's happening here. But we're going to dig into that ourselves here, so we're going to make this go away by clicking on that little X. So the first thing we're going to do is going to take a look at these categories up here across the top. These are categories of presets that exist within the new document dialog box. And over here all the way to the left is the recent category. And what we have in this recent category is presets for blank documents that we have recently used in the order that we've used them, followed up by templates that we have recently downloaded from the internet via Adobe. And these templates are pre-formatted projects with content in them that show you some interesting tips and techniques in laying out Photoshop documents. I urge you to explore these because they're pretty cool in all reality. But that's what you see here in this recent category panel, is presets you've used recently, and then these templates that you have downloaded that are stored here on your computer. Now, if we come over one category to the right to where we have the Saved button, you will see that there are some saved blank document presets in here. These are ones that I have created. So I've created both a landscape in a 24 by 36 and a landscape in a 40 by 60, and then I created a portrait in a 24 by 36 and a portrait in a 40 by 60. So these are ones that weren't built into the new document dialog box, but were things that I used on a regular basis. So I built presets for doing that. And we'll show you how to do that before we're done here. And then also, we have a list of all the templates that are saved locally on our computer over here in this category down towards the bottom. Now, once we get to the right of this divider right here, we are looking at categories of presets that are targeted on specific output types. So this first one here is targeted towards photo or photographic output types. And if we come inside this dialog box, you'll see right here it says View All Presets. I would click on that and open it up so you can see everything that's in here. And you will see within this photographic or photo preset category, these are all print sizes and resolutions that are targeted at photographic prints. And then below that, we see some presets here. And you'll notice, templates. And you'll notice when you're looking at these, that some of these are checked in blue and some of them are not. Well, the ones that are checked in blue are the ones that I have downloaded locally, and the ones that are not checked in blue are the ones that are available on the internet that I could click on and download. The other thing that you'll start to notice, it may not be apparent here, but you'll notice it as we work through more and more of this video here, these presets down here, these templates down here are targeted at photo-specific output, okay? And you can see that as soon as we jump over here to our next category, the print category, and we click on the View All Presets button down here and open that up, and then scroll below it, you'll see there are indeed some templates here, none of which I have downloaded, but they are all, by and large, targeted towards really what we would consider business printing, or potentially even offset press printing if you were going to print a large quantity of these. And that's another topic altogether, but just so you know, that's where they're headed. You'll see that I haven't downloaded any of these. There are no blue check marks next to any of these, so none of these are saved locally on my machine. Back to the top here real quickly before we leave this category, you'll see that there are indeed a number of presets up here that are blank document presets, and these are targeted towards standard business, if you will, paper sizes, letter size, legal size, tabloid size. And whether you're familiar with them or not, there's a whole category of document sizes in the business world, A sizes and B sizes, and in fact to go on up to C, D, and E if you happen to be printing really large sheets of paper, or you're in the drafting industry and you're printing big D or E size drawing sheets. So all of those presets reside right here. Now, continuing on over to art and illustration, I'm going to click on the checkbox here to open up all the presets here. These are document presets that are targeted towards standard art and illustration sizes for documents, standard poster and postcard sizes. And you got a couple of sizes in here that really kind of lend their sizing to widescreen TV, or this one here lends its sizing towards a web document, if you will. And then the templates down here, again, you can see these are all different in nature. They are targeted towards the artist/illustrator who might be interested in some of these features that are here in these presets. Moving on to the web category and opening up all the presets there, you are going to see a number of presets here that are targeted towards web content, web pages, and standard kind of web size layouts. Some of them are targeted towards the size of screens, so you can create content that's going to fit a screen perfectly. You'll also notice that unlike some of the other presets that we've seen so far, these are all specified in pixels instead of inches as the photo prints were. You'll also notice that the resolution has changed, and they're targeted more towards screen resolutions than print resolutions. And again, a number of templates down here that are all targeted towards web content. Over here under the mobile category, you will see a whole host of presets that are laid out to mimic device sizes. Here's an iPhone 10, an 876 Plus, Microsoft Surface Pro 4, Retina displays, iPad displays, Android devices, so on and so forth. And even some icon sizes in here that are standard icon sizes that people use. And again, the templates that exist down here are all templates that are targeted towards mobile devices. Last but not least, we have film and video, and we differentiate film here from photographic film, thinking more of live motion film, and certainly that's the case with video. We're thinking of more of live motion video. And these are all sizes that typically lend themselves to television formats. Here's a 1920 by 1080 at 72 ppi. That's your typical high definition TV at 1080p. Here's a high definition TV at 720p. You can see there's a bunch of different sizes here. Somewhere along the way we'll run into standard definition. Here's ultra high definition TV, or what we commonly refer to in the industry as 4K resolution. And there's even 8K resolution laid out here. That's the current hot one in the industry, is going that direction. There's NTSC presets and presets that are targeted towards the PAL video preset. This is the NTSC is kind of what you see here used in the US. PAL output is targeted more towards Europe and Indonesia, and it's a format that they use over there. And again, of course, the templates down here are all targeted towards film or video type projects. So there you go. There are all the preset categories in a quick rundown of what they do here in the new document dialog box. With all those presets in mind, let's now take a look at this preset details panel over here and its interaction with the presets, or its interaction with you when you manually set the preset details that you want for a document. So let's say I come over here and I go back to the photo category, and I'll scroll back up to the top, and again I'll open up all these presets, and I say, well, I'd like to have a landscape 8x10, and I click on that, and you'll notice that all of the fields over here populate given the values that were saved in this preset, and they set us up for 8" by 10" landscape oriented document at 300 pixels per inch as requested. There's some other things that get stored in here as well, like the color mode and the bit depth, etc. If I click on a portrait 5x7, you'll notice that the orientation changes, the size changes, and it's set up for that portrait 5x7 here. In fact, I can even go over to my saved presets and say, you know, let's make landscape 24x36, and you'll notice that it brings in those sizes that I asked, the orientation that I asked for. It has the number of pixels per inch that I wanted. You'll also notice that the bit depth here becomes a little deeper. That's something that I saved in the preset when I created it. Okay, well, obviously we can drive any one of these presets over here into this preset details panel. We can also come in here and just manually set up the document the way we want to set it up. So let's say we're going to create a 20x30 poster, for example, and so I know that that's going to be 20 inches wide and it's going to be 30 inches tall. And as soon as Photoshop sees it, it says, oh yeah, that's a portrait-oriented document, and it will go ahead and create that for us. You'll also notice that we have a choice of measurement systems here that we can use for specifying this. I could say, I'd like this to be in pixels. Well, 20 inches by 30 inches turns out to be 6,000 by 9,000 pixels, which, by the way, is still a 3:2 aspect ratio, in case you were paying attention. If I come back over here, I can obviously switch back to inches. I can see this in centimeters. I can even see it in millimeters if I would like to. So you can see all of those different measurements systems being used, especially if you're from somewhere other than the US and you use the metric system a lot. You have that option in here. I can also specify this in points, and I can specify this in picas. Now this may be new to some of you, but if you are in the offset press industry or you do typography or typesetting, points and picas are something that you're used to and you use on a regular basis. All right, I'm going to switch back to inches here. That makes the most sense to me for what I'm doing. One of the interesting things here on the side is this little checkbox for artboards. If you turn this on, which we're going to do here so we can see the result of it, it will actually create this document in an artboard. Now, if you're not familiar with artboards yet, keep an eye out on our video channel. We'll have a presentation coming out on artboards soon. They're really handy for laying up multiple compositions of a document, and I find them really great for that. Okay, next section down here, resolution. Here we are specifying the resolution of this document, and we can specify this either in pixels per inch or in pixels per centimeter. Being here in the US, we're used to seeing it in pixels per inch, so that's what we're going to go with. And you can decide in here what you would like your resolution of this document to be and the number of pixels per inch. We're going to stick with 300 pixels per inch because we are creating a print document, and 300 pixels per inch is considered to be one of the ideal sizes for a photographic print. It's not the only size, and there's clearly the potential for some debate on that, but by and large, most people in the industry accept 300 pixels per inch as the default for a document that we're going to create for print output. Now, some of the other resolutions that you might see in here would be 72 pixels per inch or 96 pixels per inch or even 132 pixels per inch. And all of those lend themselves really well to JPEG/web output, things that you're thinking about putting on your website or posting on Facebook, etc. That's really a great resolution because it keeps the file smaller, downloads obviously faster, and it's targeted really ideally at those platforms. Now, one of the things that I will caution you is don't create documents at those smaller resolutions if you think that they could potentially ever go to print. A lot of times I will create frames and borders for my web content, something that makes it look like a picture that I'm going to post on the web is actually sitting in a picture frame with a mat. I can simulate that in Photoshop. And even though I know I'm going to output that at 132 pixels per inch, I don't create it that way. I create it at 300 pixels per inch, kind of being prepared for the possibility that I might print that as well. If I created 132 pixels per inch, print question becomes a little bit more complicated. The question is the size and quality that I'm going to get out of that resolution. On the other hand, if I created at 300 pixels per inch, I know that printing is not going to be a problem, and I can always downsample later as a byproduct of doing an export, say for example, in Lightroom. Really easy thing to do, and then you have left yourself both paths if that matters to you. Okay, next topic, color mode. Photoshop works in a number of different color modes. Now, because we are specifying this as a photographic document, our color mode here is picked for us and it's RGB color. It is possible to work in other color modes, and you would see with other presets, you might pick CMYK or you might pick multi-channel color, things like that. RGB color is the most common color mode, and it stands for red, green, and blue, and those map out directly to the red, green, and blue channels that would be in your image file, and the red, green, and blue channels that are generated by your sensor in combination with the Bayer array that is layered over the top of it. I would look for a different video on color mode to understand these modes and how they work, but just know that you can specify this here and that RGB color is most likely going to be your color mode of choice. Next, over here to the right is bit depth. I don't really give a label for this, but once you become comfortable with photo editing, you will begin to understand what bit depth is. Bit depth owes its naming standard here, 8-bit, 16-bit, or 32-bit, to the number of bits that make up a byte in terms of storage for information for pixels in this image. So if we say, oh, we have an 8-bit bit depth, that means that we have 8 bits assigned to storing red color, 8 bits assigned to storing green color, and 8 bits assigned to storing blue color for each individual pixel. So if you know anything about binary math, you know that 8 bits allows you to have up to 256 different possible values in that byte. So we have, in terms of, for example, red color, we have tonality levels of red from 0 all the way up to 255, and that's how you count. You don't actually go to 256. 0 has to be included because it's a position. So you have 0 to 255 as a tonality value for red. Then you have the same range of values available for green, and correspondingly the same range of values available for blue. If you take those 3 bytes and the 8 bits that belong to each byte, and you take that 8 to the 3rd power, you will find out that you have potential for 16.7 million colors in an 8-bit document. Seems like a lot of colors, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. If we think about 16 bits per byte, that means that we now have 16 places where we can store values. And if we look at that from a binary perspective, that means that we have 32,767 values or levels of tonality for red. And again, that would be 0 to 32,766. And then we have the same range for green and the same range for blue. And if we take 32,767 to the third power, we end up with 234 trillion potential colors. Now, there will be a test on this at the end. I wish I could, unfortunately, through YouTube videos. I suppose I could do it as a poll, but that's neither here nor there. 234 trillion colors is obviously a heck of a lot more colors than 16.7 million colors. And here's why I like 16-bit documents. Photoshop, as it goes through its editing process, in a lot of the editing steps that you do, goes through a process called bicubic interpolation, wherein it recalculates all of the pixels that exist in a document, and it may, in fact, change the tonality of those pixels subtly depending on pixels around it in the editing step that you are performing. Subsequently, you might see a reduction in tonality if you take a document and go through a ton of steps. So if you start off in 16-bit mode, you have a whole lot more latitude in terms of editing steps before you start to see the effect of those pixels being interpolated. So I like working in 16-bit mode, and I primarily always work in 16-bit mode for two reasons. One is almost all the cameras that we're working with out there today offer at least 14 bits of resolution and color. So if you start with 8 bits, you're throwing a bunch of that away. And most of our computer systems today have the power to process those 16-bit documents without any problem. Where you might want to scale back is where you are constrained in processing capacity or RAM in a computer or storage space. Obviously, storing more information per pixel takes up more space. But by and large, you'll find that most systems can handle this out without much problem. Now, there's a little bit of an interesting one here at the bottom of the list, and that's 32 bits per channel, or 32 bits per red, green, and blue. And that is a massive, massive bit depth for storing color. And I don't even know that I could pronounce the number that results from these 32-bit color ranges to the third power. It's huge. And really about the only time that we find that we are using this is when we are taking in compositing HDR frames together, but we don't want to have them tone mapped. We just want to create a Photoshop document that has a much wider range in terms of exposure, contrast, black point, white point, shadows, highlights, etc. A little more advanced concept and probably not something you use right away, but it does exist here if you get to that point and you want to use it. So I'm going to stick with 16-bit. The next option we have here is the background color that we can specify for this document. The default for most of these presets is white, which means the background layer, the default layer created in this document, it will be white. And that's something to keep in mind because it's not empty. A lot of people look at a white document and go, oh, that's an empty layer. It's not an empty layer. If this is, when we converted it to pixels, a 6,000 by 9,000 pixel document, that means we have all of those individual pixels set to white. And conversely, if we picked black, every single pixel is set to black. Now, some of the other options you have here is this one here labeled background color, and that's going to pick the default background from Photoshop preferences, which you'll see here in my setup is white. I can come here and pick transparent, and that indeed is a layer that is completely devoid of any color value in any of the pixels. They are indeed see-through. And then last but not least, you can pick the custom one here, and that would bring up this little dialog box, and you can say, well, I'd really like to have my new document layer be this bright red color. Not entirely sure why you'd want to do that, but it is an option. I suppose there are some situations where you're combining certain graphic arts colors and the background helps them to be more visible to work with. So that is a potential. I shouldn't just dismiss that as an option. I'm going to go back to white as our default here. And then we're going to take a look at two advanced options down here. One is color profile. And so whereas bit depth up here talks about capacity for color, how many individual unique colors I can store, and that doesn't mean ranges of color. That means that in an 8-bit document I can have 16.7 million colors. They could all be shades of green, right? And all of those shades of green could be within a displayable or printable range, but with those 16.7 million shades of green, I don't have any room to store red or yellow or blue. I have used up every possible color address that's there. Down here, when we're talking about color profile, we are talking about range, and we're talking about what is displayable by the device or what is printable by the printer. Now, a lot of people, because of their camera, bring documents in as sRGB documents, which is the typical default color profile that most DSLRs and mirrorless cameras have loaded from the factory. In fact, I would encourage you, when you get your camera, to change that and go up to Adobe RGB 1998. This is a larger color profile than sRGB is. And when we say larger color profile, we mean there are brighter, more intense shades of color that Adobe RGB can handle that sRGB can't. So if we're sending this out to a printer, for example, and we send it out in the sRGB color profile, bright greens and blues and oranges and reds and yellows and pinks that are outside of the sRGB color profile space are going to be replaced with ones that are inside that space. In the Adobe RGB space, well, that range is bigger, and we can get more intense blues and greens and reds and yellows and pinks before they get replaced by ones that are inside of that color profile space. And last but not least, and you'll notice the one that I have checked here as my default is ProPhoto RGB, and it is a huge color profile. And in fact, there aren't many displays that can display the entire ProPhoto RGB color space, and there are no print devices yet that are capable of printing ProPhoto RGB. However, Lightroom works in a derivative of ProPhoto RGB, and you have no control over that. And once you understand that, it certainly makes sense to drive your documents out of Lightroom into Photoshop as ProPhoto RGB. A, you get round-trip compatibility there without upsampling and downsampling color all the time. And B, in Photoshop, you have a wider range of colors that you can work from. Now, a lot of people push back against that and say, well, why do that when you're going to have to chop them off eventually? Well, you may not have to chop all of them off. There may be some that some of your devices are capable of doing, and the best time to discover that is at output time. So if I always work in ProPhoto RGB, I basically start in Adobe RGB in the camera, and I work in ProPhoto RGB in Lightroom and then Photoshop. All of the documents that are coming back to Lightroom once that I've edited them are all in ProPhoto RGB. And much like print resolution, that pixels per inch that we were concerned about, I can always downsample my color profile at export time. So if I'm getting ready to take this file that I created later and turn it into a document as a JPEG that I'm going to put out on Facebook or on my website, I'm going to put that out as an sRGB document as far as its color profile, and I know that that will display safely on any possible device that may be looking at it out there in the internet, even really, really old computers with VGA displays. If I'm getting ready to print this, then I will probably, and when I say probably, I really mean 99.9%, I'll take this and I will downsample it to Adobe RGB 1998, and that's what I'll have my print lab use or my in-house printers use as the color profile for printing. And in fact, my rule is, if I'm talking to a print bureau, if you can't print in Adobe RGB 1998, you're not printing my work. Now, there are some subtle exceptions to that. If I'm printing 144 wallets for a client, I'm not particularly concerned about the color profile there because those are so small you'll probably never notice that level of tonality. But when I'm thinking about 8x10s and 16x20s and those big wall pieces or fine art stuff, I am always exporting in Adobe RGB 1998 in, by the way, a TIFF file for printing purposes. Last but not least, if I'm going to hand this file off to someone else, let's say I'm busy and I'm going to give someone else 10 of my Photoshop files and say, hey, could you edit these for me? I'm under the gun, and if you help me with these 10, that would be great. I'm going to give the files to them as Photoshop files. I won't downsample the JPEG or TIFF, and I will give them to them at full resolution in the ProPhoto RGB color space, and I will expect that back from them as well. Okay, so we're going to pick ProPhoto RGB here now that we've worked our way through that discussion. The last one that we have here, and one that you will likely never change, is pixel aspect ratio. And the default here is square pixels. Now, about the only time you're going to change the pixel aspect ratio is if you are creating stuff for very specific video content. And you can see the aspect ratios that are associated with changing those pixel aspect ratios. And the one that's the most common one that if you were in the video world you might work with is this anamorphic pixel aspect ratio, which happens to be a 2:1 aspect ratio. And this is the way that you see widescreen Hollywood movies being shot. Okay, square pixels for us. And those are all of the settings that we care about here in this dialog box. Now, one thing I'm going to show you real quickly before I click on create is this little dialog box, or a little button right here, this little hard drive with the arrow symbol on it. If I click on this, this is going to allow me to save this as a preset. So I will put it out here and I'll say save preset. And you'll notice now under my saved presets, there's that test preset. And I can reload that at any time by clicking on it and bringing it up. And then just like all the other presets, I can override any of the values here that I want to override. And last but not least, if I don't want this preset anymore, I can just simply click on the trash can and it's gone. And it will take me to the next preset in line. So there you go. There is how to set all the preset details. There's how to save the preset over here in the saved category. And last but not least, I'll just pick this 24:36 preset over here, being that we deleted our other one. I'm going to call this sample print over here in this little field here, and I'm going to click on create because I want you to see what happens when you do that. That is going to take that name and make it the name of the document. So instead of having Untitled 1, Untitled 2, all that, you now have the name of the document right here. And if I were to go ahead and save this and just specify, hey, let's put it out here on the desktop, you can see it's already got that name associated with it. So that can be kind of handy too. I don't have to print that and type that later. So there you go. There's our document created using the new document dialog box. I think the new document dialog box is the bomb, and I really love what Adobe has put in here in terms of features. All right, we're going to hop back out of Photoshop. I have a few comments to close up with. See you on the other side. All right, there you have it, the new document dialog box in Photoshop. I hope you enjoyed the tour of the dialog box, and I hope you agree with me that there's a whole bunch of stuff in here that's really handy and is going to make creating new documents in Photoshop a lot simpler and a lot faster. Remember to subscribe down there. Look for the red subscribe button so you see the new videos as they come out, and keep checking out the work that we're putting out here at Lite Studios. We certainly appreciate you tuning in. And remember, as we always say, learning equals skills, practice equals mastery. We'll see you out there.